Do you ever wonder why the Founding Fathers, in writing the preamble to our Constitution, chose to use the words establish justice right up front in speaking to the formation of our more perfect union? Well, judges and courts exist to protect our liberties and our most fundamental and sacred rights as set forth in the Bill of Rights, as well as to protect us from unlawful and unwarranted intrusion into our lives from the government. Unfortunately, many of our judges today are legislating from the bench, and trust in this important third co-equal branch of our government is languishing. After all, many judges are no longer elected. They are simply appointed. My guest today knows an awful lot about this topic. He's a sitting judge. Judge Dave Larson wants to bring his 39 years of legal experience and his balanced approach to the law to the Washington State Supreme Court. He has been a highly rated trial judge for the past 16 years and was a highly rated trial lawyer for the previous 20 years, practicing in state and federal court. I had the privilege of meeting Judge Larson at an event recently, and I was so impressed by his love for the people of Washington State and his knowledge of the law and in the proper application of it that I invited him on my show to talk to you guys today. I think you're going to love this conversation. This is the Heidi St. John podcast. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So, Judge Larson, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's just an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's very much a pleasure. I look forward to the opportunity.
So as I mentioned in the intro, I met you recently at the home of a friend who's helping you with your campaign. And it was so encouraging for me and very enlightening to hear from you. You've been sitting on the bench for a long time, to hear from you about the importance of the judiciary and what the role it is supposed to play and kind of how the public perceives it now. And I want to get into all those things with you. But before we do that, I'd love to just have you introduce yourself to my audience, a little bit about your history and your education and why this is such an important time, not only for Washingtonians, but people around the country who are looking to elect judges.
Well, yeah, the judiciary, regardless of whether judges are appointed or elected, the judiciary is the third co-equal branch of government. It's a very important branch. It's designed to kind of be that guardian of the Constitution. I talk about this democracy being two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner, right? Well, the Bill of Rights and those constitutional protections, the idea that we protect the individual is basically the Bill of Rights are an example is the leash on the wolves. You still have the wolves, you still have the sheep, but the wolves are prevented from eating the sheep because of the Bill of Rights. And the judiciary represents kind of the post that anchors that chain. And you have to have a strong judiciary willing to uphold the Constitution as written in order to protect the individual rights of all of us so that we can pursue life, liberty, and happiness.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And you've been in this line of work now for a very long time. How did you always know, hey, I want to be a judge one day when I grow up? And was the law always fascinating to you? How did you get into this line of work?
Actually, when I graduated from college, my degree was in public administration. I graduated in 1980, right when government was shrinking, so there wasn't many jobs. So in reality, I went to law school as an afterthought. I'm glad I did because it's led to a very nice career. And I was going to be a trial lawyer. I was a trial lawyer. I was rated by my peers as preeminent in my trial abilities. I became dissatisfied that in the direction the judiciary was heading, in the sense of we started being more concerned about our processes than we were about the people we serve. And so a long time ago, I decided I wanted to be a judge and ultimately became one in 2008. And it's very purpose-driven, what I do, and I'm trying to get the judiciary to actually fulfill its purpose of being the peacekeeping branch of government, the branch that people, when a dispute goes to the judiciary, people can have a sigh of relief that it's going to be in front of people that are reasoned, that are going to be logical. And as I've mentioned, I want to make the judiciary boring and dependable, which is exactly what it's supposed to be, something that become a beacon for the rest of society for how we're supposed to resolve disputes. But being a judge and now being a justice on the Supreme Court is important to me because I want to be able to have an impact in a way that reminds my colleagues that we are servants and not masters, that we're supposed to serve the public. And that's what our primary role is to solve problems, not create more with the way we operate our courts.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that you said in the short amount of time I had to talk with you that really resonated with me, because I was thinking back, it's not hard, to look back, especially over the last several years, not only here in Washington state, but around the country. People do not trust our system of justice anymore. We hear the Ninth Circuit Court, and there's this big giant, sigh of, oh, brother, here we go again, because we feel there's so much political motivation in the courts now, and it's not boring and it's not dependable. And when you said it should be boring and dependable, it really resonated with me. How do we bring that back? Does it start with educating people about what the judiciary should be doing in the first place?
I think that's a big part of it. Some of it is we've got to have an expectation that we want to install somebody that's going to have our political belief
right
in the judiciary. So all of a sudden, both sides do it, and before you know it, it's a battle to get the ideologically friendly people in the positions in the judiciary. And then we're surprised that we are driven by ideology instead of the law. And I think we just need to insist that people that are becoming judges adopt the belief that their personal opinion doesn't matter. Their role is to apply the law and the Constitution the way it's written. And that's how you get confidence in the judiciary, is being the kind of where you're not up to your elbows in the politics, because the big thing it does is it undermines and disrespects the political process when judges get involved in the political in the policy making and the politics. And the thing about the democratic process, the legislative process, the initiative process in Washington and other states that have it, is that you are allowed, everybody has an opportunity to have a voice. And then what ends up happening, you're seeking consensus in legislation, right? Where in the judiciary, only the parties to the litigation have a voice. And you're picking a winner and you're picking a loser. And if you look at any important decision that's ever been made in the judiciary the last few decades, anytime they've made decisions on controversial social issues, there's rancor and there's dispute for decades until something happens to turn it around. Versus in the judiciary, in the legislature, you reach consensus. And typically there's still people that say, hey, I don't agree. But ultimately there's peace and tranquility, a lot more peace and tranquility with the result, because at least people felt they had a voice. Well,
we seem to be at a very important juncture in the country right now, certainly with the amount of, vehement that the discussions that we're seeing. We're not really polite anymore in our discussions. There's a general, I think, distrust. And we've seen a lot of judges legislating from the bench. And someone wrote into me, and I want to read her question. She said, when you talk about legislating from the bench, what do you mean? And I thought, man, that's a great question for Judge Larson, because you can explain to listeners when you hear a pundit or someone on television or a legislator say, this guy's legislating from the bench. What's an example of what that might look like?
Well, I can use a recent example that might resonate with people in Washington state, but the example I think will resonate with all of your listeners and viewers. In Washington, we had a case called the Blake, State versus Blake, where our Supreme Court threw out our drug possession laws as unconstitutional. And the people of Oregon, just south to us, by popular vote, threw out their drug possession laws and made it decriminalize their drug
Not
possession.
Working for them very well either.
Right. And they actually reversed that.
Yep.
Well, what our Supreme Court did is the equivalent of what the voters did in Oregon. It worked out the same, because we were having all the issues we've had since Blake. A lot of the issues could be tied right back to that decision. But an example, I bring up that case because Justice Stevens, in her concurring opinion, called out the 5 justices assigned on the majority, who came up with arguments that the lawyers didn't even come up with to declare our drug laws unconstitutional. And those drug laws had been challenged twice before in our Supreme Court and upheld twice before. But in this particular case, the justices, because of their personal beliefs, decided and even talked about the legislature not doing what they'd like them to do. And that was to add an intent element to the possession laws. And so they threw out the law because they didn't like it. And that's an example of legislating from the bench. Now, personally, did I think it's fair to have an intent element to our drug possession law? Yeah. But as a judge, it's not your role to impose that when the legislature's been asked that question multiple times and said, no, we're fine with what's called strict liability. And the U.S. Supreme Court said it's constitutional. But yet those 5 justices came up with arguments that the lawyers didn't come up with to impose their personal opinion. And they did. It was the net effect of what the voters did in Oregon, but it was done by 6 people because the concurring justice that called them out also agreed that it should be unconstitutional. So there's 6 justices, 6 people decided what the people of Oregon did and decided by popular vote.
So what's the fix for that? So if that happens at the Supreme Court level, be it Washington State or Alabama, do the people have a recourse when that happens?
Well, if people are aware of it, they can decide whether to vote for that judge or not vote for that judge. And otherwise, but part of it has to do with the way we select judges. There's not enough information given to people. In Washington and some states, in Texas, I believe they have Democrat and Republican. In Washington State, we're prohibited to identify with a political party, and so some people have a hard time picking it on that basis. The other thing that's not out there is the criteria that people should use to select judges. And the number one criteria for me, the one that I hope people value in me, is that I believe that strongly in my role as somebody that needs to interpret the law and the Constitution the way it's written and to leave my personal opinions at the door. And a lot of people spend time trying to find out your personal opinion. But the question for a judge is do they have the ability to check their personal opinions at the door? And I can tell you, there's people that expect you to have personal opinions and expect you to impose them if they're politically favorable to them on both sides. And it's unacceptable for judges to do that. And so in the federal process, the appointment process that we see on the news where they get people, in front of the Senate where people get confirmed and everything, that once the judge is appointed they're appointed for life. They for good behavior. They can be impeached, but I'm sure there's judges that have been, but it's very difficult. So it's very important in the selection process to make sure we have the right people.
Well, I'm just gonna air a little personal gripe. Okay, you ready? So
Okay.
here's my personal gripe. For decades, that I have been a voter in Washington State, and we see judges come up all the time. There are judges in smaller jurisdictions. Obviously, you're running for the state Supreme Court, which is a huge big deal here in Washington State. But I've always been very frustrated. I read the bio in the voter's pamphlet, which is worth about as much as the paper it's printed on, and we have no idea. Really, because we're not given the information in the limited amount of time, from my perspective, that we're even able to help to choose a judge. It seems
Right.
to be getting more rare and more rare that we could even vote on a judge, because these judges are typically appointed. And I'd love for you to speak to that also.
Sure.
But what is? I mean, you just gave us a glimpse into it. But for an ordinary person like Heidi St. John, and I'm looking at my voter's pamphlet, and there's a guy who wants to be a judge, and we're not supposed to know his political beliefs because he's supposed to check them at the door, right? Exactly what you just said. How then do we vet? It's like we don't have enough information to even make a wise and good decision.
And to me, that's a failure on the part of the judiciary itself, because I think we should be the leaders in getting out there to educate people on how to vote for us. We haven't been, because in a lot of ways it benefits the incumbent for people not to be aware. I've actually written legislation forming the Judicial Elections Commission, its job would be to educate the public, to rate candidates, to basically, much like civil service. In Washington State, there's no check and balance on the gubernatorial appointment when there's a vacancy.
It's amazing.
Washington State now, in the last 12 years, 172 of the 207 judges that are sitting on Superior Court, Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court were appointed by one person with no check and balance, no confirmation process. And in that, there was only 30 contested elections. Mainly, and so 142 judges have never been picked by the people. And one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence was that the king picked the judges. Mm-hmm. And I'm not suggesting our governor is a king, but this
But he sure is acting like one. I mean, you don't have to say it, I will. You know, I mean, he's acting like one. Yeah, right.
Yeah, the executive branch, one branch should not be able to pick all our judges. And so that what my proposal would do is that in that rating process, the governor would be able to pick from the top 3 that pass, that go through the rating process, just like civil service. Mm-hmm. And then you would remove the political appointment process. So you can imagine in the federal level, if the president was able to pick whatever judge they wanted without having to go through the Senate, what that might look like. And that's what we have at the state level in Washington. And it needs to change. We've got some good judges, don't get me wrong. But they're in one of our counties in Pierce County, 4 of the judges decided that they were going to, because they were dissatisfied with the gubernatorial appointments, that they were going to let their term run out so that the people could decide. And in this seat right here that I'm running for in the Supreme Court, it's the first time in 12 years there's been an open seat. Otherwise, you're running against an appointed incumbent.
And it's virtually impossible to win in a situation like that.
Yeah, because the system treats them as if they were elected. And then it's very difficult to overcome that if you're a challenger. So this, like I said, the people of Washington get to decide for the first time in 12 years.
This is a big deal. It's really important. And I was so glad that I went to meet you the other night and I didn't know any of this stuff. And I was telling my husband, as we're driving home that night, I said, man, people need to understand what's happening with the appointment of these judges. I think most of the citizens of Washington State, and I would say this is probably true around the country, don't have any idea of the inside baseball, don't know how somebody's name gets into the voter's pamphlet or how the judge got there in the first place. And so then it becomes, I think, an issue. And I'd love to hear what you think about this. But from where I'm sitting, just as a normal, just ordinary citizen, it seems to me that the net effect of all of this has been to disenfranchise the voter. And so then the voter is like, well, I can't do anything about it anyway. And so then they just check out. Is that what you're seeing?
Oh, I think so. I think a lot of people don't even bother to vote for. If you look at how many people vote for governor and how many people vote for judges, there's a substantial difference because people they don't know what to do and they don't want to just check a name for the heck of it. And that's where we as the judiciary need to be advocates for a better way to do this. The other thing that I'm an advocate for is, and I'm not a socialist or anything else, but I'm for public financing of judicial elections, not to give candidates money, but we have the technology now to push information to people electronically and otherwise about candidates. And so you'd be able to, in my model, a candidate would be able to raise a certain amount of money to develop content. And then the Judicial Elections Commission would then push that content to the voter, just like a mailer. It takes a lot of money to mail stuff.
Yep.
And then the voters would have that, and the candidate would be rated and have a rating, a score that people could look at. There'd be and then the criteria would be broken down by judicial temperament, independence, all these different issues would have a score next to it. And then the voter would be able to say, hey, this is the type of person that I'd like to have as a judge. And then, and then right now in Washington State, if somebody donated or contributed to my campaign and their case came before me, right, the other party, the lawyer for the other party would first have to object. And then I could still decide to hear the case, even though that person contributed money to me.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah. Right. And under my model, there would be a mandatory recusal. So if somebody gave money, I could not hear their case.
So right now it's just meaningless, right? So there would be an objection, and then the judge could say, well, I want to hear it anyway. So it really is just meaningless, right?
Even if the other lawyer, you'd have to assume the opposing lawyer would have the courage to object. You know what I mean? The temerity to say, hey, judge, I think you're going to be biased because this
guy had contributed to your campaign.
Right. And
yeah,
then,
and you're saying it should be an automatic recusal, right? That you should go, oh, hey, this guy's donated my campaign. So whether I'm biased or not, it looks like I could be.
Right.
So therefore, I'm recusing myself.
In 2016, there was 2 cases in the Washington State Supreme Court, one on education funding called McCleary, and the other one was on charter schools. And the Washington Education Association, the teachers, I'm not picking on them. I'm just using it as an example.
I'll pick on them. You don't need to.
There you go.
I do it all the time.
But the teachers union was a party to both of those lawsuits. They gave the maximum donation to the incumbents and spent $400,000 approximately in independent expenditures to help them keep office. The McCleary case resulted in the highest pay increases for teachers in state history. And but that doesn't mean the judges are corrupt or the justices are corrupt or anything else.
They're using the system.
The appearance of that is that justice can be purchased, and it's not. I know the justices, they probably felt the way they did in McCleary regardless. But it just creates an appearance that I don't think we need for the judiciary. And that's why getting the money out of judicial elections and making it so that candidates, the people that would contribute to me would be family, friends, people that I would have to recuse myself anyway if a case became before me. The amount of money I'd have to raise would be a lot less than what you have to raise now. And you'd have more people be able to afford to run. And that's one of the big impediments is that, it's expensive to run a campaign, and you'd have more people be able to throw their hat in the ring and have more choices for the people. As an incumbent judge myself, I don't like that idea because I always like
makes it a little harder for you.
The opponent that's named write-in. That's the one I always like. Unopposed is
unopposed.
But the bottom line is that when there is an opportunity for somebody to be challenged or need for somebody to be challenged, that there's an ability to do that in a way that makes sense.
Well, and it kind of it brings you back to the idea, and we hear this, and have heard it for decades about campaign finance law and campaign finance reform. Having run for Congress in 2022, there are a lot of things that happened that I was like, wow, that is crazy. And it seems to me that you could level the playing field by simply saying you can't raise any more than this amount of money. So figure out what you want to do with this amount of money and then raise that. And it seems because elections have become about money. Right? Oh. The more money that you can get, the more ads you can buy, the more airtime you've got on television, the more ads you can get on the radio. And it in some ways has stifled competition. I mean, even in my little race for Congress 2 years ago, I raised, I think, about $1.3 million. And that was no joke. You spend all your time raising money when what you want to be doing is educating voters.
Right. And as I indicated to you, I've developed a program called How Freedom Works, and it teaches the fundamental principles of freedom, right? And the reason I brought that up just now is because the reason there's so much money in politics is because we've disengaged, and I say we, because I'm a citizen too.
Right.
We've disengaged from the political process for a number of reasons, and it's as individual as a fingerprint. But as a result, there has to be Madison Avenue techniques used to sell candidates. We're being sold no different than a bar of soap.
True.
And so it becomes expensive. And so if people were more engaged, we spent more time getting people aware of how to discern candidates, what to value in candidates. Because right now it's all about power. And that's not what our system, that's why our system's kind of imploding. Our system's we're supposed to keep power at arm's length. Yes. We're not supposed to be in love with it. We're not supposed to covet it. We're not supposed to go after it. And if the other side's going after it, we need to assert more power. It's about responsibility. It's about what we owe the public. We're servants, not masters. And I talk about Article 1, Section 1 of our own state constitution that says all political power is inherent in the people. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. And the purpose of government is to protect and maintain individual rights. You can't accomplish that if the people we install in office, either in the executive, the legislative, or the judicial branch, are about power. They got to be about responsibility because we are trustees of our government, and the people themselves have to insist that we have people that are in love with responsibility and not in love with power.
Yeah, it's true. And we've got a ways to go to get there for all the reasons that you have just outlined, chief among them being, I think voters are frustrated when it comes to vetting and voting for judges, which is the reason why I invited you on the podcast. I want people to hear your voice and say, hey, this is actually important. You need to engage. You're running in a race against a guy who has a little bit different philosophy than you do. Right. And I wonder if you can explain that process a little bit more, because that's the other thing. So, Dave, when you were talking to me, I was thinking, we don't ever get to ask. I feel like we're not even allowed to really ask the questions anymore. And I'm so heartened and so encouraged. I so desperately want you to win because I'm like, man, we've got somebody who wants to represent the citizens of Washington State, who understands his role as a judge and understands what the judiciary exists to do. So tell us frame your race for us a little bit in whatever capacity you can.
Well, first of all, when it comes to judicial races, there are rules we have to follow, and sometimes we hide behind those rules. The rules are that we can't talk about how we might rule in the future. We can't say anything that's going to demonstrate some kind of bias or prejudice towards how we might make decisions. But past decisions we can talk about. We can talk the administration of justice, how courts work. There's no restrictions whatsoever. And that's what right now, the addiction, the mental illness, what's happening in our communities, the administration of justice, how courts are run, is a significant issue that we have to talk about. But in terms of the race I'm in now, we had a primary, and the two of us survived the primary. And the other person was handpicked by the Chief Justice to be the replacement of the person that's retiring, supported by Governor Inslee, supported by Attorney General Bob Ferguson. I'm in the trenches trying to keep people off drugs. He was a sponsor of Initiative 1922 in Washington that didn't get enough signatures that would have decriminalized drugs in Washington.
It's amazing.
He's well qualified. He's a good guy, and I'm a good guy too. But we do see things differently. He would have decided the Blake case, that case I talked about earlier about drug possession. He would have agreed with the majority. I would have been in the minority and the dissent. The capital gains tax case in Washington that a lot of people outside of Washington don't know about, where they called an income tax, an excise tax, to get past a constitutional provision that prevents income taxes. The Supreme Court did some legal gymnastics to get there. He would have been with the majority. I would have been with the dissent that, no, it's an income tax and it's not unconstitutional.
Boy, that just hit me where I live, because I just bought and sold a house.
There you go.
And it's no joke.
Right. And so we are, and the Columbia newspaper down in Vancouver just endorsed me, and they've talked about the fact that the court right now needs kind of a diversity of thought.
You just got an endorsement from the Columbian.
Yes.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And with my endorsements, the other thing too, is I'm proud of the breadth of the endorsements. An example is that I'm endorsed by the Washington Council of Police and Sheriffs, which represents the police officers and sheriffs in the state. And but I'm also endorsed by the president of the NAACP of Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. So
they think you'll be fair. I mean, that's what you're hearing with balance. This breadth of they think you'll be fair.
And they know that I hope they know, and I believe they're endorsing me because of it, is that win, lose, or draw, if you're in front of me, you know you got a fair hearing. You know it came from the right place. And the best compliment a judge can get when somebody loses in front of you and they thank you and thank you for being fair.
Yeah. They know they got a fair shake. You mentioned a minute ago the administration of justice. How would you, as a Supreme Court justice, be able, this is a just practical application, to help communities that we live in and the individuals that are affected by addiction and untreated mental illness everywhere we go? I mean, I live in Clark County, and we're starting to see the politics of Portland bleed into Clark County with the homelessness, people staggered around. It looks like a zombie apocalypse right down there by, I-205 and Mill Plain Avenue, for example. How can your position as a Supreme Court justice help with this particular issue in our communities?
Sure. Well, the Supreme Court's charged with really multiple duties, but the main two are to decide cases that come before them, obviously, that they accept for review. And another big part of what they do is they run the courts. They set all the court rules. They set the tone. They're the prow of the ship for our courts in the state. We don't have a unified court system, which means each county, each city has their own courts, right? But what we have, the Supreme Court right now has a lot of priorities that they seem to engage in. But one of them is not what's happened in our communities, and it could be. Mm-hmm. And so what you need is we don't have a unified strategy. We don't have leadership when it comes to trying to get us together. And being a trial court judge now for 16 years and seeing this develop, or almost 17, seeing this develop over time, just watching it grow, it's the fact that we don't have that strategy. We keep passing people back and forth, that everything's fragmented. Everything is siloed in a way that the people we serve aren't getting served. The best example is to talk about it as a jigsaw puzzle. Each of us, whether it's police, courts, treatment providers, jails, whatever, represent a piece of the puzzle. And we all know exactly where we fit. And we think we're the answer. If you just give us more money or just create this program for us, we'll solve it, right? The people we serve, all they see is a bunch of jigsaw puzzle pieces strewn about, right? And a lot of people who live in the woods have given up. The reason I know this is because I'm in my community court. I spend time building them up to believe in themselves that they can overcome this, right? Mm-hmm. And I've seen success from it. I've also seen failure. But what I'm advocating for and what I've been successful so far in, at least in the baby steps of it, is to advocate for a participant-based approach where the person becomes the jigsaw puzzle. Mm-hmm. We then figure out what's missing in them, fix that. And if they step outside the court system because we've helped solve that, then we all gain, right? Mm-hmm. The reason that strategy would work, especially if you focus the first time anybody's ever in court, is because people would self-identify over time as because we've always had crime. There's always been criminals. Over time, somebody will self-identify that is just a criminal that also has a behavioral health issue, rather than the behavioral health issue causing the crime. And because now we don't have a strategy. We wait till people are out of control and then we intervene. We can't tell the difference. Yeah. And then what we see is this cycling through our communities. People get frustrated and lose confidence in the courts because they see somebody with multiple crimes going to jail and being released right away, and they go out and do the same thing. Same thing. Because in a lot of ways, if we intervene that very first time somebody comes to court, we would have potentially created a lot better outcome for people. Like right now with theft cases, the tradition has been to sentence people to go to a class about why theft is bad. Now, if somebody is reeling from addiction and mental illness, I've seen it happen over and over again. And I could spend a whole show talking about some of the things I've done in my court to try to alleviate some of this. But the way the law is right now is that the law is structured, and the community therapeutic courts and everything are structured to screen out people that aren't qualified. And to be qualified, you got to be out of control. And my point is, let's not.
Why are we waiting that long?
Control. And I got in my court, for example, I have barrier-free access to peer navigators. If somebody comes in to my court and wants to pay a traffic ticket and has an issue, and they can talk to a peer navigator. When I spoke at the drug court conference a couple of years ago, I started my presentation on this concept as, are you willing to live with the success you'll never know about? Because I'll never know whether that the people were successful because I'll never see them in court. I had a woman one time in court for a traffic ticket, and turned out her husband had died. She had been involved in the criminal justice system before. She was at that point where she was at a breaking point. Mm-hmm. So I had a peer navigator come into court. She was on Zoom. I had a peer navigator come into court, connect with her, and whether it worked or not, I'll never know. But another case I know worked was I had a guy in my community court. He was addicted to fentanyl and heroin, and he was going into inpatient treatment in 3 days, and he was in court, and you could tell he was uncomfortable. Nobody else saw it. When it got to me to talk to him, said, "Hey, what's going on?" He was having cravings. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I brought the peer navigator in, and that peer navigator walked alongside him until he got into inpatient, and he was successful. And if we didn't have that, that guy would have relapsed and probably never
right back out to the streets. Yeah.
So those are where we fail as a system is when people are ready for change, we're not. And what I'm doing is trying to have this working closely with the legislature We've gotten money now for what's called the sequential intercept model, and the baby steps of that is kind of the gold standard. I've also developed a concept called regional resource networks, and there's a pilot project that's funded in the 2023 session, where we, instead of each city or each police department, each court having to stand up resources, you share resources across jurisdiction. Then that allows you also to have a participant-based approach, because you're referring people to the same place. Versus now, if I'll pick on my own city, if my city decided to create a LEAD program, which is law enforcement assisted diversion through the police department, they wouldn't need to coordinate with us. And my community court, I wouldn't need to coordinate with them. Mm-hmm. And our jails that we use, we wouldn't need to coordinate with them, and they could create their own programs. We have the same people navigating through those systems.
A lot of red tape.
Right. And we're just being back and forth between these conflicting directions, and they're either not participating or they're giving up. Mm-hmm. So what I always say is, people want us to be tougher on crime. People want us to be softer on crime. I want us to be smarter on crime. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court, and this is a long answer to your short question, but the Supreme Court can play a significant role by being the champion in the legislature, the champion for the trial courts, being the prow of the ship and arguing for the things that the trial courts need, and in conjunction, and to see the court system as part of a continuum rather than this isolated monolith that we've allowed ourselves to be, this kind of where we're the courts and you're not. Mm-hmm. And we need to see ourselves as part of our communities in a way that where we are part of the solution in a significant way, and leaders in part of that solution in a significant way.
Well, it's so refreshing I bet you anything that for the vast majority of people listening to this conversation have never heard a judge talk about what his role would look like, or what judges can and cannot do, and what it means to legislate from the bench, and how we could actually help our communities deal with these really real, these are very real issues that are impacting tens of thousands of people every single day across the United States and around here in Washington State in particular. In the few minutes that we have left, I'm wondering two things. Talk to us about the program that you've started, because one of the things I really appreciate and admire about you is you're not just a judge. You actually care about the community. You're trying to educate what Thomas Jefferson described as the rising generation. A lot of the issues that we're facing in our country right now are happening because we're not educating our young people about the law and the role of the government. They don't understand the role of government. And you've had a big part in creating a program that's actually doing that in Washington State. Tell us a little bit about it.
I'm involved in multiple things. I don't want you to feel guilty or anything, but I didn't go teach street law at a local high school today because I'm with you. So the students.
Yeah. That hurts. That hurts, Dave. Okay, all right, that hurts.
No, that's okay. We'll make it up. but I twice a week I go into a high school and in a local high school and teach a class called street law. It's a practical law for students. Every year when I start that class, I ask, what's most important to freedom? And they go around the room: the law, the Constitution, police, military. You know what the answer is? The belief that it's important. And if you don't believe it's important, then your freedom's taken away, somebody else's freedom is taken away. And the program that I think you're talking about is a thing called How Freedom Works that I referred to. It's based on 2 rules that I'd like everybody, if we lived by them, we'd have a different world. Rule 1, love the freedom of others as much or more as you love your own, is rule 1. Rule 2, it's more important to do right than it is to be right. And the reason those rules are so important and why we're eating ourselves alive right now is because we're doing the opposite. My rights are more important than yours, and I'm going to be right even if I'm wrong. And we are eating ourselves alive. We're in this world where I'm entitled to my opinion and you're entitled to my opinion too, right? And we are so interested in getting our way that we've lost our way. And I'm trying to get people to understand that this gift that we've been given of liberty is a responsibility, that the default in history, the vacuum that keeps sucking us back, is tyranny. And that's what constantly tries to bring us back to power and control as the dominating force. And the reason freedoms work is because we are fighting against that vacuum, and because there's been a battle for conflict for thousands of years, and there'll be a conflict thousands of years from now. And that's people that want to be free and the people that want to dominate and control. And the people that want to be free just mind their own business, and the people that want to dominate and control keep encroaching and encroaching and encroaching. And we're at a point now where the line in the sand's been redrawn too many times.
Boy. And
we have to renew the fundamental principles of the idea of to be free. You have to be a moral, self-governing person. That the more we can control ourselves, the less we need government to control us. And that our system of government is really designed to, like I say, hold power at arm's length and not welcome it in the houses of government, not encourage it. And I don't know if that answers your question, but ultimately it's something that for youth and for adults, it's very important to understand. And there's one of two things that's going to be on my tombstone. It's either this is the last day I'm going to eat like this, or at least I tried, right? And because I think it's too important. I was going to retire next year, but this open seat came up, and I look at the faces of my grandchildren, and they excuse me, they deserve better.
Yeah. I think you and I are in the same season of life. I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm looking at, our 5 grandchildren, soon to be 6, and realizing that what we are leaving them is rapidly deteriorating. And we have a limited opportunity to fight for freedom and to fight for the principles that have made this nation the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And this election is so consequential. And it feels, at least here in Washington State, and of course, I travel the country and I talk to people all across the United States. It feels like a 5-alarm fire. It doesn't matter where you are, people are feeling it. And this is giving them a chance to engage. And you are at the front of that. As you look to the future, and this is not about your race really, but as you look to the future, do you feel hopeful? Are you just terrified, or do you feel somewhat optimistic? Are you starting to see a shift? Do you think, people are beginning to get it and engage again, or where do you think we're headed?
It feels like a steamroller. It's on my toes. You know what I mean? And I think there's three types of people that are dangerous to freedom. Okay. One is somebody who wants to dominate and control. 2, people that want to go along to get along. 3, people that remain silent. Okay, you look at any time in history when that's been the case, and it's always turned out disastrous when those 3 people seem to be the dominant force. It didn't take many people to kind of push back and develop the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and say, no, we don't want to be ruled by tyrants anymore. But we're kind of in this world right now where there's a self-imposed tyranny, where we impose it on each other. One of the things I talk about with the justice system is that dignity and respect is essential to us as eating, breathing, and sleeping, and to our existence. And the court system is designed to when those things go wrong, we restore that. But again, it all goes back to if you look at those 2 rules, they're grounded in dignity and respect. Love the freedom of others as much or more as you love your own. It's more important to do right than it is to be right. That course I talked about, the where we're failing is as a society is the Constitution is the foundation, and what I'm trying to teach is the hard pan that foundation sits on, the belief system that forms it. In communist China, they're guaranteed the right to free speech, right to religion, right to assemble, freedom of the press. But if it's just words on paper, right? If people don't, like I say, what's important to freedom, what's most important, the belief that it's important. It's really understanding that every one of our bills of rights, every one of those exists because of some abuse that's occurred in history. If you look at every one of them, you can tie it directly back to how individuals have been abused, and why that Bill of Rights is so important, why our Declaration of Rights and our state constitution are so important. And if people aren't willing to say, no, there's a line in the sand that you will not cross, then we're going to be where we are. Article 1, Section 32 of our state constitution says a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles is essential to individual right in the perpetuity of free government. And it's there because our founders signed our constitution about 100 years after our federal one. And they saw how people kind of went away from those principles over and over and over again in certain ways. And so the idea was to continue to bathe yourselves in those principles, to be made to draw that line in the sand and not let people impede on individual rights and our ability to be free.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And I love that you brought that up. And I'm sure you've heard this quote. I have, hundreds of times. But on October 11th, 1798, John Adams wrote to the Massachusetts militia that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern any other. And people need to engage. I love that you brought up that we can't be silent, right? That was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who said, silence in the face of tyranny is itself evil. Not to act is to act. And we cannot be silent anymore. We have to engage. And the main way that we engage right now in the next 30 days is to vote. And that is coming up. It's coming up rapidly. If people want to support your campaign, can they do that from anywhere, or do they have to be a citizen of Washington State?
Well, one of the rules we have is if it's about money, I can't personally ask for money. I can tell people that,
tell us your website, yes.
Right. And that there, to my knowledge, there is no rule preventing people from contributing outside the state of Washington. But the website is Larson for WA, and that's LarsonForWA.org. And on the website it has my bio. There's some things in there that I shared that I hope you look at and see, because I wanted to share a little bit of my heart. Mm-hmm. Because the way you do fairness is when your mind's in balance with your heart. If it's too much mind, you're unfair. If it's too much heart, you're unfair. You got to be in balance. And so I want people to see not only my ability to reason, but my ability to feel, my ability to have that heart be in balance with the mind. So, and that's where people can have access to all different buttons and things that they can use to do the things I can't talk about. So.
Well, I think you've accomplished that today. I think I have seen both. You have an incredible legal mind. You understand our Constitution and the reason that we have 3 co-equal branches of government. And we've talked a lot today about why it's so important that people engage in the process. And, I consider it a great honor to know you, and it encourages me that a man of your character would want to sit on the Washington State Supreme Court. And I hope people will check it out. And that is Larson for WA, right? WALarsonForWA, larsonforwa.com. I hope you guys will check that out. .org.
Okay.
Yeah. Where's the .com going to take us? I don't even want to know. That's terrifying.
I don't know. But I didn't control any of that. But it's fun being a judicial candidate when you got good people that control other things that you don't have to worry about. So,
that's a good thing. And you are certainly surrounded by good people. Well, Judge Larson, it's just been a tremendous honor for me to have you here at the show today. I'm praying for you, as you well know, and looking forward to seeing what happens. And the election is coming up. When do ballots drop here in Washington? It's pretty quick, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I think it's the
next week or something.
17th. Yeah, next week. I think they've dropped next week. But But by the way, electing judges is, in my opinion, is the only way, because the people, it's just we have to do it better. Yeah. The appointment process is full of politics. It's just behind the scenes politics. Mm-hmm. So having the people select is the way we need to do it. So I'm glad that we have that the voters have the opportunity, and in this state have the opportunity, the first time in 12 years, to actually truly select who they want as their justice, rather than go along with who the governor selected. And
this is a statewide race, right? Because it's for the Supreme Court. So it doesn't matter where you're listening to this from in Washington State, whether you're up in Bellingham or down here in Vancouver, Dave Larson's going to be on your ballot. So people need to be looking for that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. I just don't think we can give up, right? We have to have hope. If we don't have hope, then we're just going to shrink and move away from the struggles that we're facing here in Washington State. But you give me hope, just to hear people.
I don't know if we have time, but do you have time for one more story?
I do. I'm not the one who has people waiting to be cases to be adjudicated. That would be you.
That's it. Well, I just want to make sure, because we didn't talk about this, and it's one of the the story that I tell, kind of that about my attitude of elective office. I've been an elected official now for 18 years, and I'm very involved in civics education. I was with some high school students along with some other elected officials, and one of the students asked, "When did you feel closest to your position?" And each of the elected officials went down the line. I was last, and they talked about something they did in their official capacity, some program they developed or whatever. When it got to me, I said I was in the back of a line at a chili cook-off, and somebody came up and talked to me and said, "Hey, Judge, how you doing?" Talked to me for a couple minutes and left. The person behind me, when that person left, said, "Hey, you're a judge, just cut up in front of the line." And I said, "Actually, when I don't have my robot, I'm like anybody else." And I told the students, the reason I'm telling you that story is my number one position is that of citizen, just like anybody. I play a role as a judge. I have a responsibility, not a power. I am a servant, not a master. The minute I think I have special privileges, I've lost sight of what my role is. And that's to be a trustee, the trustee that believes in that my job is to be responsible, to fulfill responsibility instead of power. Because when you do that, it's about the duty you owe to others rather than what people owe to you. When it's about power, it's always about what people owe you. And that's where we're in the predicament we are now.
I was going to say, you just described politics. You just described it. Yeah.
And it's exactly why we have three branches of government, is because power is always corrupts. And the three branches of government keeps that power from coalescing in one place. And so all this relates back to that Civics 101. But I wanted to share that because I not only share it so your listeners and viewers can know my heart there, but also so hopefully that other people that are running for office adopt that same ethic. Because that's what we need in elective office in all three branches, are people that truly are in love with the idea of the responsibility of the position instead of the power that comes with it. So thank you for letting me tell that story.
Yeah, I'm so, like I said, I'm so encouraged. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're very busy, and I so appreciate you squeezing me in today. And I'm looking forward to helping you as much as we can. I hope this podcast goes out far and wide, and that people all over Washington State, certainly, but around the country here, there are good people who are running for office around the country. We have a responsibility to be informed, to educate ourselves as to the positions and the heart behind the people who are running, and then to do our part and vote. And so I'm excited to see what happens in the weeks ahead, and keep me posted.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And appreciate for you, because these issues we talked about are extremely important, the beyond measure.
I agree. I could not agree more. Thank you for coming on the show today. It's just been a delight to have you.
Thank you.
You guys want more information on my guest today? You can find out more about Judge Dave Larson by going to larsonforwa.org, and I will link back to that in the show notes today. You guys, get off the bench, get onto the battlefield. This is your opportunity to engage in the process, and I hope you'll take advantage of it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you right back here again at the intersection of faith and culture.